How does our gracious Majesty the Queen combat loneliness? More importantly at this time of year, and after of course the terrible loss of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. Hi, good morning, Neil Sean here in the heart of London. Thank you for joining me today. Lovely to see you. And it is at this time of year that a lot of people do feel incredibly lonely. And naturally so, it's all about families, people getting together. But of course we are, I think, all in the same boat around the world right now, given the effects of the going pandemic, you know, where we're all locked down, shut down, can't meet friends, all that sort of stuff. We're normally going to pantomimes, meeting parents for dinner, perhaps after work drinks, social events, knit and natter groups, you know, the sort of thing. And that really is what makes us a wonderful community in the world. But of course, it doesn't matter whether you're royal or not, you can suffer from loneliness. So how does our gracious Majesty the Queen combat this problem? According to a very good source, Her Majesty the Queen has returned, like many people do at her age, back to her youth. And let me explain. As you can imagine, Her Majesty the Queen is incredibly busy. They still keep her busy with the red boxes, of course the weekly audits with the British Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Boris Johnson, and all sorts of political things that she has to go through and of course cast her eye over. Of course at her age, perhaps some might say she should slow down. But how she combats that loneliness, I've been told, is this. She's returned to the things that made her smile as a child. In particular, this one gentleman, George Formby, he was a big star over here in the United Kingdom way back in the 1940s and a particular favourite with our late Queen Mother. So much so, in fact, that he performed at Windsor Castle privately for Her Majesty the Queen, who was then a princess, alongside Princess Margaret on numerous occasions, and of course for King George too. But it's not just George Formby that makes us smile, and return back to some sort of normality. This gentleman here I was lucky enough to meet myself. He is the wonderful Sir Norman Wisdom and another favourite of the British monarchy. In fact, when he got knighted, let me tell you, I knew Norman at the time, he went along to Buckingham Palace and was really advised not to trip up, you know. He had a famous thing where he was walking along the road and he tripped up. Well, guess what? Walking down to meet Her Majesty, he did the famous trip, and guess what? She loved it, smiled and said that he was a naughty boy for doing it, but she thanked him for putting a smile on her face. Now, George Formby was considered a rather racy performer way back in the 1940s, but apparently the young princesses both liked him so much they would request copies of his 78 records sent directly to the palace, even though they were banned at that time by the BBC. In fact, apparently, the young Princess Elizabeth could do a very good impression of George Formby and still can. But what's interesting about George himself is the fact that, of course, he sort of fell out of favour in the 1950s, but never truly with the monarchy. They always really were delighted to see him at royal variety events and private royal shows. And according to a very good source, this is exactly how our gracious Majesty the Queen is getting through some of the darker days. And we all know what we mean by that. You know, when people have lost someone, everybody fusses around in the opening few months, and it's the line, isn't it? You know, whatever you need, just let me know. But then they get busy with their own lives. This is no different whether you are, of course, the ruling monarch, the Queen of England. You know, you still have those moments where you feel totally alone. It's good to know, isn't it, that of course our gracious Majesty the Queen truly can still put a smile on her face by looking back at some of the happier times that she shared, of course, with her late father and of course her mother, plus let's not forget, of course, her much beloved His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. I won't do an impression, but if you haven't seen any of Sir Norman Wisdom's movies or indeed George Formby's songs and films, check them out on YouTube. They really will give you a chuckle, much like they're giving our gracious Majesty the Queen. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.